Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international bestseller called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And today on our show, we'll be speaking with Debra Diamond. Debra is a former Wall Street money manager, CNBC commentator, and so much more. In 2008, she had an extraordinary experience that left her with unconventional powers. She left a high-profile life to pursue a life of spirituality and purpose. For the past 9 years, she's worked in the metaphysical field. Debra is a psychic medium and the author of the book, Life After Near Death, Miraculous Stories of Healing and Transformation in the Extraordinary Lives of People with Newfound Powers. Debra earned an MBA from the George Washington University, has a graduate degree from Christie's education, and has a PhD from the Esoteric Interfaith Theological Seminary. She is also a former professor at the Johns Hopkins University. Well, I'm super excited to hear her story, as I'm sure you are too. So Debra Diamond, a warm welcome to We Don't Die Radio.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, pleasure to have you. I'm excited about your book. I spent the afternoon with you out for my walk. I watched your YouTube video and really super thrilled that you're here today. So how about a little bit about you? In your introduction, there's so much, and I just want to hear what happened, who you are, but where are you coming to us from today?
Well, actually, physically, I'm based in the Mid-Atlantic. I live in Baltimore.
Nice.
And I spend part of the time in New Mexico, but primarily based on the East Coast. And in terms of my background, I mean, as you pointed out in the introduction, it's varied, but like many other people who do what we do, I have a very different background from what I used to do versus what I do today. However, I can tell you that I am a psychic medium. I'm also an author, but I don't know if there's such a thing as a typical psychic medium, but if there is, I'm pretty sure I'm not it. I come from a very different background, a very, very traditional background. I was a money manager on Wall Street for many years, a commentator on CNBC, and a professor of investments and portfolio management. And that was what I was trained to do. I have an MBA. I had a career on Wall Street for many years. That was my chosen profession. Now, the thing is, when I was in the investment business, I always felt like I knew things. I didn't know how I knew these things, but I just kind of knew them. It was to the point where if you're in the investment business, you get a big stack of mail delivered to you, several times a day, annual reports, prospectuses, proxy statements, all sorts of research reports, which you're expected to read. And for me, I would always kind of know before even reading any of these reports, I would know about the companies, the managements, the products, the markets, if it would be a good investment or not. Now, in the investment business, nobody talks about being psychic. I had no idea why I knew any of these things. And my boss used to say to me, Debra, you have good instincts. So I decided, well, I guess that's the answer. I have good instincts. And that was pretty much as far as I considered it. I was busy. I had 3 kids. I was juggling, 20 balls up in the air. And so I just didn't have time to philosophize about it. But, I always had this ability. And it wasn't until 2008 I decided to take an intuition development class in New York, just because I figured, well, I had pretty good intuition, so it would be fun to take a little class to tune it up. And I went up to New York for the weekend to take this class. And the class, there were about 25 people in the class, men and women. I didn't know any of them. And our teacher was a former PhD from Columbia who taught Far Eastern religion at Hunter College. And it wasn't a particularly woo-woo class, but we were just practicing some kind of fun and low-key exercises in the class to develop our intuition. And I was getting everything when we were doing these exercises. And I had, again, no idea how that was possible or what I had done to have this happen. We took a break in the class. And when we came back from the break, our teacher said, now we're going to do a seance. And I thought, I looked at the schedule for the day. I thought I was in intuition development class.
Yes.
I didn't want to be in a seance. But then I thought, well, I'll just do this and then we'll go on to the next exercise. And it was still Saturday morning and the class ran through Sunday afternoon. So the teacher said, I will put everyone in a meditative state and then I will take you out of it. And if you see anything, you let me know and I'll tell you what to do. So I thought, well, that doesn't pertain to me because I'm not going to see anything. So she put us in a meditative state and then took us out. Now, when I meditate, I'm not in any trance or anything like that. Just felt relaxed. And she took us out of the meditation and she said, does anyone see anything? And I looked around the room and all the students were looking at each other. And I raised my hand and the teacher said, yes, Deborah, what do you see? And I said, I see about 50 people. So I was seeing people who were my relatives who had passed.
Wow.
I was seeing people who went with the people in the room. And then I was seeing just random people who had passed who were just kind of strolling through. I mean, for instance, I saw some 42nd Street showgirls. It's kind of funny because we were not too far from Times Square.
Were you shocked, first of all?
Yeah. Yeah, I was overwhelmed. I was completely overwhelmed. Had no context for any of this. Didn't know what was happening. I wasn't afraid because it was sort of like, if you have a dream and you see something in a dream, you're not really afraid. I mean, unless it's maybe something bad, but you're not afraid, Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't afraid, but I didn't know what was happening. And these people were all talking to me, by the way. So I didn't know what was happening. So the teacher said, well, if you see someone, she said to me, in the corner of the room, that means they probably go with someone sitting in that corner. So I said, well, I do see someone in the corner. And she asked me to describe the person. And I said, well, he's Hispanic. He's got dark hair, parted in the middle, a handlebar mustache, and big white teeth. And as I described him, the woman sitting in that corner began to sob. And she said, I can identify him. And she said, he was my fiance. He died 2 years ago.
Wow.
And she said to me, the woman said, if I show you pictures on my cell phone at the break, would you be able to identify him? And I said, sure, because I could see him very plainly. So during the break, she flipped through her pictures and I said, wait, stop, there he is. I could identify him. And she said, yes, that's my fiance. Now, she had expected to hear from him. She was a person who believed in all this. And, after he passed, she expected she would hear from him and she never did. And she was sorely disappointed.
Sure.
So the fact that I had made this connection, could tell her that he was okay. She was very grateful for that. And she gave me a big hug and she thanked me. Now, remember, I used to work on Wall Street. So there are no thank yous on Wall Street and there are no hugs either. So I, was struck, it wasn't lost on me that I had done something meaningful for someone.
Sure, yeah.
And that really registered, really registered. So I continued in that class the rest of the weekend. We did another seance. The same thing happened, only on an even more escalated level because now I was open. And I was very puzzled by all of this. I was just really having a hard time processing it. At the end of the class, I drove back home. And on my way home, I called one of my sons. I have 3 sons, but one is very left brain, very logical. And I called him and I said, can I tell you what happened to me? And he said, yes. So I explained what happened in the class. And when I was all done, well, he listened. And then when I was all done, he said, well, that makes sense. We're just energy and the energy has to go somewhere.
Smart kid.
And thank you. So he gave me a context for understanding what had happened, a context that didn't involve ghosts or the paranormal or, something eerie. This was sort of a pseudoscientific, or scientific / spiritual kind of context for things. And remember, I come out of a left brain background too. So this was something I could deal with. If you tell me in terms of energy and science, I can understand this.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I thought about it and I thought, okay, that makes sense. Now, I still didn't tell anybody what happened to me because it's not the kind of thing you talk about. It's like, what did you do this weekend? I went to a movie. What'd you do? I saw dead people. No,
right,
you didn't
right.
do that. So I didn't tell anybody. That summer, I decided to go to Taos, New Mexico, where I had been many times in the past. And I'm also an artist, and I decided I would go out there to paint for 2 months. And I rented a place and settled in to paint. And what happened was I didn't come back. And that's a very common story for Taos. Out there, if you ask the locals, how long have you been here? They say, oh, I came for a weekend 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, you just tend to stick. It's a highly energetic place. It's in a vortex. Taos Mountain there's been continuous prayer on Taos Mountain for 1,000 years. It's just a very high vibration place. So I found that I think I was just meant to be there. So I stayed, and this is where I unpacked the gifts that Spirit gave me. And this is where I started to delve a little deeper into, being a psychic and a medium, and, eventually offer workshops and do readings. In Taos, when someone says, what do you do? And you say, I'm a psychic, they say, oh, me too. It's
no big deal. It's regular.
Yeah, it's not like the East Coast, So it just wasn't a big deal. And I relaxed about all of it. And that's where I did my work. Eventually, I came back to the East Coast because I felt like I had done what I was supposed to do. I came back east thinking, well, I guess that's the end of that because I'm coming back to the East Coast. And the East Coast is not like New Mexico. Nobody's going to care if I'm a psychic or, it's just not the way things are kind of how they work. So, but that's not what happened. I came back and someone heard about me and they asked me to do a reading for them. And then they asked me if I could do a reading for their girlfriend. And then the girlfriend's mother wanted a reading. And then somebody asked me to do a workshop. And before I knew it, I was working practicing as a psychic and a medium. Now, how did I get involved in near-death experiences? Well,
Yes.
I was asked to do a reading for a famous NDE, or near-death experiencer, in Washington, D.C. in 2013. And when I read for this person, I was getting some very unusual symbols. Psychics see things in symbols. I was getting some very unusual symbols. And symbols unlike any other reading I had ever done. Symbols that involved the universe and energy and just some different kinds of symbols. So when I came back home that night, I started thinking about this person in the reading, and I thought, what happened to him? Why he had an artistic gift. Why does he have this gift? What about other NDEers? Do they get gifts? What are they supposed to do with them? How do they get this gift? So I went online and I Googled NDE after effects, and I found that there hadn't been any research done. So I said, well, I guess I'll have to do the research. Now, it's not that far-fetched because remember, I used to be in the investment business. The first 10 years, I was a healthcare research analyst. So I knew how to do conventional research, and plus I'd been in healthcare. So that's kind of how I got started with this. I only wanted to investigate cases that had a physiologic or measurable kind of after effect, because there are lots of people who have NDEs or spiritually transformative experiences who say, I'm more spiritual than I used to be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
well,
I hear that a lot. Mm-hmm.
I can't measure it.
Right.
I don't know how spiritual you used to be, and I can't measure how spiritual you are now. Or I'm a psychic, or I'm more psychic than I used to be. Can't measure it. But if someone says to me, my eyesight improved, or my IQ went up, or my hearing improved, or I play a musical instrument and I never could before, or I channel music, or I get mathematical downloads. I mean, those are all things that can be established and they can be quantified. And in many cases, they're recorded. Someone whose hearing changed, they may have had a hearing test before the event and after the event. Or there are people whose eyesight improves and they had a physical before and they had their eyes examined. And after the event, they have another eye examination. And guess what? Their eyesight improved. So this could all be documented. And that was what I was interested in, because it's hard for science to refute when there are multiple cases of documentable physiologic, or anatomical changes. So there are many, many cases out there of people who've come back with their energy transformed, but there had not been another book written or researched about these cases. But people come back from NDEs with their energy altered, and it can manifest in a variety of ways, but these are, just some of the ways, and those were the cases I was interested in.
Oh, I'd love to hear more. I have spoken with many people who've had the NDEs, and yes, the things they share, while they're great and they go on to make a huge difference with humanity, not measurable, more spiritual and, all these more psychic and things. So I would love to hear some of these stories, or we would love to hear, because I've never heard something like someone's eyesight improved or their hearing or their IQ, or they could channel music or mathematics. No, I had no idea that that's an after effect with some people.
Well, what's so funny is I was flying a few months ago on a Southwest flight, and you know how they have the airline magazine. And there was a story about a guy who'd had some traumatic experience, and he came back, and I can't remember exactly what his alteration was, but he had something like improved IQ. And I read it, and I thought, wow, these are like the cases in the book. And then I went online to read more about it, and the editors from Southwest said, we have been deluged with letters about this sort of thing. Evidently, it's more common than we thought.
Wow.
So it just hasn't been discussed. It hasn't been brought to light. But yes, there are people who have enhanced eyesight. I can tell you about one of the cases in the book, Robert Baer. He was a policeman, a cop in California, and he worked the riot squad in LA, South Central LA, which if you've ever been there, that's a pretty difficult place.
Sure.
And he also was involved in the Berkeley riots. So he was involved in beating people and gassing people.
Wow.
Yeah. And he, he'd been a policeman for many, many years. But he went to visit, he had a son in Arizona, I think in Phoenix, and he decided he was going to go visit his son. But before he went to visit his son, he had a physical and an eye exam, and everything checked out great. He went to visit his son for a week. He had a wonderful time. His son took him back to the airport to go home. And he said, when he got into the airport, he just didn't feel right. But he said he John Wayne'd it, and he made it onto the airplane, at which point he dropped dead.
Wow.
There were several paramedics on the airplane, and they revived him. But while he died, and you don't, by the way, have to clinically die to have an NDE, and I can tell you more about that later. But so he had an out-of-body experience. He was above his body, and he left, and he had a life review. And in his life review, he saw what people were saying about him behind his back. And remember, he was a pretty tough guy. And he came back from his NDE, and he survived his heart attack. And he said, I only want to do good from now on. I only want to do good. So he moved to Oregon, and he's now, he writes grants for foundations, like for unwed mothers, and he coaches the local Little League team, and, was named Citizen of the Year in his community and all this.
Nice.
But he noticed his vision had changed. So he went for an eye exam, and they tested his vision, and it was 20/10. Now, before his NDE, he had his vision checked with his physical, and it was 20/90. So his vision improved to better than perfect vision following his NDE.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so there are many stories. I've met lots of people whose vision has improved. As I said, people come back from these events with their energy altered. and it can manifest in many, many ways. Now, not everybody's going to come back with improved IQ or vision. People come to me for readings, and many people who've had transformative experiences, and they say, I read your book, but my vision didn't change. Well, not everybody's vision is going to change, but everybody will have been transformed in some way. And it could just be that they are more spiritual, but many people do have other after effects. There was a woman in California who heard about the study that I was doing, and she contacted me, and her IQ went up by about 20 points. She had her IQ measured. She was a college student, and she had her IQ measured at that time, and her IQ was, I think, 122 or 123. And she had an NDE in childbirth in her 20s, and she had her IQ tested again after that, because she noticed that she was able to solve puzzles much more quickly. Like, her mental processes had really sped up. And she was watching like an Olympic event one time with her niece, and before the computers could flash the results on the screen, she was like calculating all the results. And when she was, I think, studying for her PhD, she and her partner in one of her classes had to test each other through some sort of process, and the partner couldn't get her to miss a question, and the partner called the teacher over and said, I can't get her to miss anything. And the teacher said, well, you can stop now. So she noticed that she was just getting things very quickly. So she went and had her IQ tested again, and it was now 145, which is Mensa level. So I believe. So,
That's great.
Her IQ went up, more than 20 points. There are people who, have other abilities. I mean, some people come back with artistic abilities. There's a woman in the book who came back who downloads quantum physics formulas, and she has 32 bins of paper in her closet, filled with these formulas. And she doesn't know what to do with them because she's a former hairdresser.
Oh my, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. So now all these stories are in my book, and more. I mean, there are many more stories. And they're all interesting, and they're all from credible people, and they all have been documented and checked out. And, NDEs are very, very common. Now, the thing is that people don't talk about them. People don't talk about these spiritually transformative experiences because they don't want to, there's a fear of ridicule. They don't want to be embarrassed.
Right.
So people don't talk about them. But according to a Gallup poll in the 1990s, 15 million people in the U.S. alone have had a near-death experience. So there's probably even, many more than that. It's just that the research isn't current.
Right. That's a lot of people, though, for then.
That's a lot of people, right? And, and in my book, I talk about, the near-death experience world. I mean, resources for people who've had near-death experiences, because, it can be difficult if you've had one of these, and especially if you don't talk about it. Where do you feel safe? Who can you tell? Where is their community? And there are some places, where you can go for that. I have a chapter in the book that explains that. So it's, now the near-death experience world has really, interest in it has really grown and expanded over the last number of years, partially because Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven.
Yes.
And he was a former neurosurgeon, and I feel that because he was a Harvard neurosurgeon, he brought credibility to the topic. And a lot of people looked at his book and said, if he could write his story, I could write my story. I could tell about it. So, more and more people began to talk about this and write books about it. And of course, television, the media has seized on it. There are now lots of TV shows and movies and whatnot about near-death experiences. And, let's face it, it's dramatic. It can be portrayed very dramatically with visual images of the light and heaven and tunnels and all of that. Now, you don't have to have experienced all of that to have an NDE. I've had many people come to me and say, I read your book and I read all these cases, but I didn't go through a tunnel, or I didn't see a light, so I guess my experience wasn't valid. And the answer to that is the definition of an NDE, according to the International Association of Near-Death Experiences and several other organizations, is if you have one of these experiences and come back transformed, unable to go back to your previous life. It's not a check off the box kind of thing where if you can check off, so many boxes, I saw a light and I went through a tunnel, then you had the experience, because that's not what it is. Some people have out of body experiences and see a light. That doesn't mean they had an NDE. So it's not about the elements, although many people believe it is. And the media is partially responsible for that, because whenever somebody has an NDE in a TV show, they always go through a tunnel and see a light. But it's in the real world, it's not a prerequisite, or a requirement to have that experience.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I've interviewed a bunch of different people who've had NDEs, and their stories are different. And so people are like, well, how come they're not all the same? And yes, there's some people have the life reviews, some people see loved ones, some people feel the light and a huge amount of love, but others don't. So it's nice to hear that you've done the research, and it doesn't have to be that those things are the same. But they are transformative experiences.
Right. And now people's experiences are going to vary, because people are all different, right?
Right.
And the experiences are very much customized to the person. So if they expect to see grandma, they're very close to grandma, they may see grandma. If they believe in Jesus, they may see Jesus. If they believe in Buddha, they may see Buddha. There's no template, that fits everybody, because it's very much a reflection of your beliefs, your consciousness. I mean, it's very interesting how these experiences are put together, because they are customized to each person. But, in my book and with my research, I did a combination of research. I gave everyone a questionnaire and I interviewed them, and that's that's conventional research. But I also did readings on all of them, because look, I'm a psychic medium, and there were questions that they couldn't answer. I could give them a questionnaire and they couldn't answer who were the beings of light they met. They didn't know themselves, so they were all interested in getting readings because they had questions about what had happened to them. And what we found in the readings were that the experiences that they had were, again, very customized, very individualized, and were meaningful to each of the people. Okay. So, and that makes sense, because if you want to transform somebody, you have to give them something that's meaningful to them. If you gave me somebody else's NDE, that's not going to mean anything to me. But if I, have an experience where the most meaningful thing in my life shows up, that's going to really affect me, down to my toes. And so, these are life lessons. These are learning lessons. And in order to make them as impactful as possible, they are customized. And, this is why some people have life reviews and other people don't, because people would ask me, how come I didn't have a life review? And that was a question that, that would come up in readings. And what became clear was some people didn't have life reviews because there was no one to give them one. If you grew up and you were very close to your grandmother and she was the most influential person in your life and she really meant something to you, and you have an NDE and your grandmother, who you haven't seen in 40 years, shows up to give you a life review, I can guarantee you you're going to notice that. You're going to pay attention. But let's say that you grew up and there was nobody who was really, maybe your parents weren't around much, didn't care that much. There was nobody who really was a mentor to you. There wasn't anybody there. Those are often the people that don't have the life review, because there's nobody there that, would be the right person to give them the life review. So, but, they get something else. They may have something else happen to them.
Debra, have you come across anyone who's had a negative near-death experience? I've heard very few of those stories, but every so often somebody stumps me and I don't know what to say. That it was scary. It wasn't a feeling of love. Have you ever experienced any of those stories?
Yes, there are. Well, they say that about 2% of these experiences are negative. We don't really know because people don't report. We just don't know. But there's a figure thrown around that's 2%. Now, there was a person in the book who did have a negative experience. I included it in the book. This guy, Javier is his name, and he was, again, a kind of a nasty guy. I mean, he would even admit it. He was an unhappy, kind of negative person. He was Hispanic, and he was the lightest skinned person in his family. And in his family, the lightest skinned person had the most respect. And so he had many brothers and sisters, but he ran the family. And so if he wanted to eat, everybody ate. If he wanted to go on a trip, everybody went on the trip. Wow. He was like a tyrant. And one time he was, his cousin called him and said, "I'm a little short on money. Can you help me out? I need like $1,000. And he said, "Sorry, I'm going to Las Vegas for the weekend." And he went to Las Vegas. He lost $1,000, and it briefly crossed his mind, oh, that was the amount of money my cousin wanted. Oh, well. So he was just like not the world's nicest person, and he would say that also. But he was very close to his grandmother. And one night he went to bed, and he had this horrible experience. He felt like he was being pricked by 1,000 sharp needles. He saw darkness, terrible figures. He was scared to death. He woke up crying. But his grandmother was in this experience. His grandmother was in the experience. Now, but she said she just came into the experience, but I don't remember all the details, but she came into the experience. But the rest of the experience was really frightening. And he woke up crying, and the next day he couldn't get out of bed. And he just had a very difficult time dealing with it. Well, that night, one of his brothers called and said, "I have some bad news for you." And Javier said, "I already know what it is. Grandma died last night." And his brother said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Because she said goodbye to me." I guess in the experience, she came in and said goodbye. So he had that terrible experience. Now, after that distressing NDE, he went through a period of a couple years where he just couldn't get himself together. He used to drive 120 miles an hour along, Pacific Coast Highway, and he would get pulled over by the police, and they would say, "Just be careful, more careful next time." He couldn't get himself arrested. He was trying every which way. He just couldn't live with himself. He just didn't know what was going on. Now, it took him a couple years, but eventually he began to transform. And he says now, today, his family says, "We don't recognize you." And he says, "That's okay. I don't recognize myself either." He throws birthday parties now for his nieces and nephews. He comes home to take his parents to Costco. He was never an athlete. And at the age of 37, he took up softball and won some kind of award. And they said to him, "Well, you've been playing your whole life." And he's like, "I'd never have played before." He's a do-gooder. He's like Robert Baer. He just was transformed to, very high vibration, individual. And he's quite something now, but it did start with that negative NDE. Now, a lot of these people do come from a background of darkness. Their lives are referenced by darkness. And that was a question, we wondered about too in the readings. And, I discuss this in my book. Why are these people, why were their lives referenced by darkness? Well, it became apparent that, who better to have a transformational experience than someone who has come from darkness? They're ready to go to the light. They're ready for transformation, right? So, so a lot of these people came from, very dark places. And, it was sort of like they went along so long, in this darkness, and then Spirit reached out and said, "Okay, they've learned their lesson. It's time for the next thing." And it's like Spirit takes these people. I feel like Spirit has their eye, or the universe has their eye on these people as candidates. And when the time is right, they have one of these experiences. Now, people have said to me, how can I have one of those NDEs? That just sounds great. This is just what I'm, you know, and I say, no, actually, this is not something that you want.
No.
It's not, they think, oh, this is going to make my life perfect. But the thing is, it comes with a lot of other, issues that are not so easy to deal with, because now you've got one foot on Earth and one foot in the universe. And, let's face it, we are wired to be here on Earth. We're not wired to be in the universe.
Yeah.
So, people have to figure out how to kind of manage here in this world, because that's where we live right now.
Absolutely. And I know there's people that have a feeling of being without a body, of the NDE, and then they come back in and they're filled with a body that may be in pain or crippled or whatever it may be. And, so there's a grief that I was here and now I'm back here, so I don't think, while they're miraculous and transformative, I don't want to ask for one, when the time's right, I cross over. If I have one, so be it. But like you say, they're customized to each person. I love that. I remember reading somewhere that people do things for two reasons, either to move towards pleasure or avoid pain. And I think if they are customized, and maybe some of the people that have the negative ones, that's how they would respond and that's how they would transform, as opposed to being surrounded by lots of loving cherubs or something. Who knows? I'm not God, so I wouldn't know, but it's a good thing to ponder. Yeah. Let me ask you, when we talk about energy being altered in people with their eyesight and hearing and IQ and all these great things, I've heard stories of people that have had like bodily healings. Like, have you studied any of those people whose cancer has gone away or things like that?
Yeah. There's a case in my book about a doctor, Rajiv Partir, who was chief of cardiac anesthesiology at Bakersfield Heart Hospital in California. And he was, your typical type AA or AAA physician. He had two cars, I think a Mercedes sports car and a BMW or something. And he would go off to the hospital at 6 a.m. and if somebody tried to cut him off on the freeway, he'd go after them in his car. And he'd be on the phone with his stockbroker and very high charged guy. And he lived in a 15,000 square foot house, and he was at home with his wife one day, and he got a call from his doctor, and the doctor said, I have some good news and bad news. And the bad news was that Dr. Partir had cancer. And so he was operated on, and he ended up having 6 operations, and they couldn't cure the cancer. And in the meantime, he had become addicted to pain pills and was on antidepressants and still had cancer. And the cancer was progressing. And they were going to do a 7th operation when he got an infection and sepsis set in. So he was ambulanced to UCLA Medical Center where they operated on him. And while he was on the operating table, he had an NDE. And in his NDE, he saw his sister and his mother in India. They live in India, having tea. And his mother was wearing a red sari, and his sister was wearing a green shirt and blue jeans. And he came back from his NDE. Within days, he was off the pain medication, off the antidepressants, and his cancer was cured. That was, it was cured. He's never had it since. He sold his 15,000 square foot house and bought a small house. He sold his cars and bought a Prius, and he quit his medical practice. And and this was a very left brain guy, a man of medicine, right, and science. But he's actually friendly with, do you know Anita Moorjani?
I do.
Yeah,
I love her book, Dying to Be Me.
Yeah. So they're friends because Anita and Raj had their NDEs at the same time, and they're friends. And there are many cases of spontaneous healing. Remember, we are energy, right? And, if you come back from a spiritually transformative experience or an NDE with your energy altered, it means basically that you come back with your with too much energy. Now you're energetically top heavy in a way. Let's say that the average person is 99% body and 1% consciousness, right? I mean, we don't really know, but we use very little, we use very little consciousness. We're mostly in our physical bodies. But when people have NDEs, they come back, they're like top heavy with consciousness. They have too much consciousness. They still have their physical body, but now they have this consciousness that they like is kind of trying to drive them around. And they have too much energy. Now that energy is very high vibration energy, and high vibration energetic work can be healing. I mean, we see it in Reiki, we see it in all sorts of energetic healing. And the people who are doing that kind of healing are not even using the high levels of energy that somebody who would have a transformational experience would encounter. Because that energy in an NDE is coming straight from the universe. It's not coming from, the Reiki master in your office building, who might be able to channel high vibration, but it's just not the same. So, they're getting that very high vibrational energy, and it has, it just can have an impact, a physiologic impact on a lot of things. The other thing that was kind of interesting, well, there were so many things that were interesting. When I met a lot of the people, the cases for my book, and I interviewed them, I noticed so many of them, they would tell me their age, and they always looked like 20 or 30 years younger.
Really?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So, evidently having a lot of high energies, also can make you more youthful looking. I mean, that's anecdotal. I can't, swear to that, but it was always interesting to me. I would meet these people and they'd say they're 65 and I'm thinking, they're maybe like 40.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting.
Debra, before you went to that first intuition seminar, what were your own thoughts about death and afterlife and all that? Did you have any, or you just didn't think too much about it? And my real question is, how has, between becoming a psychic medium, writing your book, transformed you and your beliefs?
Good question. Well, I didn't think too much about it because, remember, I don't know if you know anybody who works on Wall Street, but it's relentless. And, so I was very busy and I had 3 kids and, everything else going on. So I didn't think about it too much. And also, doing that kind of work does not lend itself to self-reflection.
No, it does not. Right.
It's a dollars and cents business. And so I was always interested in the mind. I was always interested in psychology. I was always interested in those things. But I didn't know anything about the metaphysical, really. And this was also quite a few years ago. So, it was a little different than today. I just didn't know. I was curious, but didn't spend a lot of time on it. And I don't know how much there was really for me to delve into at that point. But how have I changed? Well, I take it for granted now that there's more, to our world than what we can see. And, in our world, particularly in the Western culture, if you can see it, it's true. And if it's invisible, it's not, it doesn't happen.
Right.
And I don't believe that anymore. I'm not sure I ever believed, but I definitely don't believe it now. There's so much that goes on that is unseen, that is in the invisible world. And I really believe that this attitude that, it has to be reproducible and it has to be seen and it has to be in the physical world for it to be real. I really attribute that to science and to Western medicine. And that has such a pervasive effect on our culture and people, that, what I do is poo-pooed, and dismissed. Because, obviously it couldn't happen. Science says, can you reproduce that reading? Although I can reproduce a reading, but, you can't reproduce an NDE. That's not possible. But now I do believe, and I know that, that this is true, that there's, many levels of reality happening at the same time that we are only privy to one in this physical world. But, as a medium, I read for people. 99% of the people I read for, I don't know. I have no idea who they are. I read long distance by Skype. These, people will contact me.
Great.
And, they could be from anywhere in the world, and I've never met them. And I'm reading for them, and somebody, one of their loved ones comes into the reading, and they are clearly identified. They give me information that, identifies them. Now, how would I know that?
Exactly.
How would I know that? I mean, I don't know these people. I don't know their families. I don't know anything about them. So, the information is all out there if you can access it. Now, you don't have to be a psychic and a medium to access it. You can be trained to do this. And I just happen to, have started from probably a little higher level than some, but, you can be trained to do it. We all have intuition. Some people pay attention to it. Not everybody does. But if you pay attention to your intuition, it's like a muscle and it becomes stronger. And intuition is just kind of a lower form of psychic ability. If you kept working on your intuition through meditation and opening up your mind, the information that you get is going to become stronger and more frequent.
And how much do you want to practice? Anyone can be a great piano player, but you take lessons and you practice and you practice and you practice. And while there are some psychic mediums that have got the gift, more times than not, I hear stories of people that really developed it and really sat in meditation and studied. And so I do think we all have it. And again, it might not be everybody's passion, but it can be developed. I really do think so.
Yeah, no, it's true. I know when I have workshops, people say, I've been meditating for 3 months or, a year, whatever. And I say to them, look, if I gave you a concerto to play on the piano and you'd never taken a piano lesson and I said, here it is, go sit down and play it, would you be able to play it? No. But if I said, here's this concerto, go off and come back in 5 years or 10 years, you'd be able to play it. It's practice. It's just like anything else. People think it's magic or it's hocus pocus. You can just do it. Well, there are certain techniques. You learn how to do it and then you practice it. And, that's just how it is.
How do you live your life, Debra? I guess the better question is, do you have any sense of what this life is all about? If we don't die, if there is a hereafter, any words of wisdom that could enrich our life now?
Wow, that's a big question.
Oh, I know.
So I try to do things that are meaningful to me and to others. I am not interested in superficiality, which tends to be a trait of many people who have had these transformative experiences. I live very much the life of the mind. I do a lot of reading, a lot of intellectual pursuits. I spend a lot of time in nature. In terms of relationships, I am interested in relationships that are true and authentic. I'm just not interested in chit chat.
Right. Yeah.
Which could be a failing, but I mean, it just is what it is. I surround myself with things that are I try to surround myself with things that are important and meaningful. In my house, I have a lot of natural elements, music. I'm also an artist and a musician. So, all of these are high vibrational activities. And I try to do that because that nurtures your soul. And as you said, before we got on the air, you said you had taken a long walk. I'm a big walker, and I find that I have to do that because it grounds me. It connects me to the earth. And when you spend a lot of time out of your body, like I do, doing readings and whatnot, you need to ground yourself. And a good way to do that and a natural way to do it is to walk in nature, not walk on the sidewalk and not walk, down the street, but, walk on a path in nature and be around nature. So, those are all things I enjoy doing, and they're pretty essential to my life. I don't watch much TV. I do read a lot. I don't know and then what is life about? Wow, that's I I I do believe that our soul is, we're on a continuum. That life here on Earth is just part of the continuum, and that we continue. Our soul continues. Our essence continues, and it's much like in an NDE. It's what you take with you are your strongest beliefs and what's most important to you here on Earth. This is just one part of the deal. So, this is our time to cultivate those beliefs that are actually meaningful and, that can contribute in some way energetically to our world and to the universe and to others.
That, to me, is a great answer, because just by listening to you and just hearing, it's like this human vehicle that we have, you're using it. You're being of service. You're being creative. You have enriching relationships, not just the superficial ones. You like to read. You like to learn. So it sounds like you're taking care of your vehicle and using it and going to Taos and all that. I don't know if there is a perfect answer for that question, but it just sounds like you're a living demonstration of living life to its fullest. I mean, I know there's always more, of course, but that's what it sounds like to me.
Well, thank you. It's it's interesting that you use that metaphor of taking care of the vehicle, because I often think of it that way. It's sort of like driving your car. You could think your car is like really important, except that it's really just the vehicle that gets us around. Mm-hmm. But you do have to service it. You do have to take care of it, because it's your vehicle while you're here, right? And and you can use that car for a lot of journeys. You can go lots of places and do lots of things. So it's just funny to me that you use that metaphor.
Yeah, I like calling it that, because it's what I feel, and there's still things we can explore, and we could at any time change our GPS to a different destination, and and that's all okay. As we grow, we have different interests, and not good or bad, but we have lots of experiences. Well, so I want to ask you now, how can people get your book? How can people contact you? Do you welcome people who are interested in getting a reading from you via Skype?
Yes, definitely. Okay. So I do read by Skype long distance, and those readings are the same as in-person reading, because energy is non-local. So, you don't have to be in the same room with someone. That's why, people do telephone readings. But Skype works the same way. And so I am available for those. My book is Life After Near Death, Miraculous Stories of Healing and Transformation in the Extraordinary Lives of People with Newfound Powers. And it's available online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble online, and also available at bookstores. It's available at most Barnes & Noble bookstores. My website I have two websites actually, Debra Diamond Psychic, and it's Debra Diamond, like a diamond ring, DebraDiamondPsychic.com and DebraDiamondAuthor.com. So they can contact me through my website. I do workshops. I give a lot of talks. I travel, all over the country and give talks and workshops. And, and I, love hearing from people. I read for people who've had NDEs, but I read for all kinds of people. You don't have to have had an NDE to have a reading. So, I do readings in person if you're in the mid-Atlantic, or, some people travel quite a distance, but other people just have, will have a reading by Skype. So it's all good.
I love that. It's all good. It really is. And you're on Facebook, Debra Diamond Psychic Medium.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, on Facebook.
Facebook, Life After Near Death. In fact, any of you who are listening to this on YouTube right now, if you just scroll down in the description, I've got easy links to all of Debra's websites. There's a great YouTube video. You can watch her speaking, and an easy way to purchase her book. So to make life easy. And if you're not listening through YouTube, if you simply go to WeDon'tDieRadio.com, you can click on this episode with Debra Diamond. And you've got a great and easy to remember name.
Yes, it's very alliterative.
Yeah, it's super good. Any closing comments or thoughts or words you'd like to say before we close this episode?
I think, Sandra, we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, we did a
I
lot.
think key is just to think of, we don't die. I mean, energy, as we started out the program, energy doesn't, doesn't die. So, it can change form, but, we are energy, and energy continues. So I think, that's a good way of understanding a lot of this. Of course, we don't have explanations for all of it, but it's a good place to start.
Oh, it's great. I mean, we can't see the invisible GPS signals and the wireless internet, and they're very real. And even you mentioned quantum physics down to our tiniest, if people break apart an atom, I mean, it's just invisible energy, so I buy totally into life after death being real, that energy does not disappear. And energy can live on top of energy at the same time. Hence, I think
Yeah.
heaven is all around us, if you want to call it that. The afterlife is just that. It's afterlife, but it's still here. So I love it. Well, I've loved speaking with you today, Deborah, and
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it too, Sandra. Thank
yeah,
you.
very much so. We'll keep in touch for sure. And for our listener, thank you for spending the hour with Debra Diamond and I. I think it's definitely been of interest to me, and I hope it has been of you too. I want to encourage you, if you are somebody who's on Facebook, we started a Facebook group for listeners who are interested in talking about life after death, maybe getting some support through grief, talking about what it is to be human. In the search box on Facebook, just type in We Don't Die Listeners, and we'd love to have you join us. Also on my website, WeDon'tDieRadio.com, you can find all the past episodes, 204, I believe, quite a few, and see some of the amazing guests and listen to their stories. You can also join the Insiders Club and get a very healing audio called How to Survive Grief, as well as learn more about my book, We Don't Die. So in closing, again, thank you. My name is Sandra Champlain, and I've been delighted to be your host on each and every episode of We Don't Die Radio. And I do believe that life is an education for the soul, and that your life here on earth is important. So I really want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.